All right, I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting of the School District of Waukesha. It is April 7th, 2014, and all 5 of the committee members are here. Lori, were we properly posted?
Yes, the meeting's been properly posted.
Okay, thank you. And we have an opportunity for citizens to address our committee. Do we have anyone signed up for that?
Of course.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Bill Morrow.
Okay, Bill, would you please step forward? I don't know if the mic is on there or not. If it isn't, just kind of tap it on. And if you could give us your address, Bill, we'd appreciate it, just for the record.
Sure. I live at 2807 Algoma Terrace
Okay.
in Waukesha. And I'm here on, as a parent on behalf of the West Booster Club. I am the vice president of West Booster Club. And, you know, it was very exciting at the last board meeting when the board approved the Field of Many Dreams initiative to continue forward. And I just wanted to kind of give you an update of where we're at. I think that night we left with a goal of $232,700 was the goal to complete the project, the funding that needed to be raised at the high school level. And just so you know, at West alone, we've been able to chop off $83,000 of that. So it's my understanding now that we're at $150,000. And I just wanted to let you know that the fundraising continues to be very active. And Wednesday night, when you're at your general board meeting, we're actually having a town hall meeting in the West cafeteria. And what that's designed to do is to get parents, kind of get some synergy going, maybe explore other opportunities for field advertisement that we don't know about yet, or that we haven't tried yet. And so tonight I just wanted to come as a concerned parent. You know, when my son's a junior at Waukesha West, and you saw a lot of the kids were here at the last board meeting, and the next day in the halls all they could talk about is we're getting the fields, we're getting the fields. So there's a lot of excitement among the students of the district, and we're doing our darndest to get there, and we're getting close. And I just wanted to kind of give you an update because out of respect for the Finance and Facilities Committee, I think you guys need to hear this first, you know. So that's where we're at. We got, like I said, we got a big meeting Wednesday night. We're hoping to knock down the rest of it, you know, with field advertisements. And I know Todd keeps you updated, but when I approached him about a parent coming and just giving you an update, he thought it was a good idea too. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Appreciate that very much, and thank you for all the hard work that you're doing with the children.
Thanks.
All right. Looking at our agenda tonight, we're going to be...
I think we have one more person.
Oh, we do? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sue Baker.
Well, do you want me to wait till later?
We do have you scheduled for the discussion item, Sue. So, we do have a pretty full agenda this evening, and we do have a couple contracts that we are going to be looking at here. So we're going to be breaking our meeting up into really 2 sections. We're going to have a closed session here in just a little bit, and then we'll reconvene into open session. So at this point in time, I'm not really sure how much time the closed session is going to take. Every time I try to guess, I'm just wrong. But I'll try to guess anyways. I'm going to say roughly 30 minutes. Could be more, could be less, though, so don't hold me to it. So that's my best guess. And so at this time, I would be looking for a motion to adjourn into executive session per Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent E, for the purpose of consideration of contract negotiations. Do I have a motion to that degree? Mr. Edlin?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second to that? Second by Pat Madden. And that is a roll call vote. Lori, would you please take that?
Ms. Madden?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Aye.
Mr. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Edlin?
Aye.
And Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll move into closed session, and as soon as we wrap that up, we'll reconvene into open session and continue with our action information items and discussion items. All right. Thank you for your patience as we convened into executive session for the consideration of contract negotiations. We are now starting on Roman numeral 2, our committee issues. Action items first. We're looking at the approval of our monthly vouchers. Joe, what questions did we have emailed or called in? Any at all?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Are there any that we want to ask of Joe? This is an action item. I'd be looking for a motion. Mr. McCaffrey?
I move to approve the monthly vouchers as presented.
I second.
Second by Mr. O'Brien. Any questions or further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Lori, passes 5-0. Next action item, we are looking at a new contract for our employee benefits. We're looking to actually change our consultants at this time, and we went through a bidding process, and these are just focused on the employee benefits consultant that we relationship that we have. And as you can see, we're basically, in the last 12 months, we've looked at virtually all major vendors. We will be getting to another one later this evening, too. So essentially, in the last 12 months, we have looked at bidding out services for, I want to say, I don't know if there's any essential service that we haven't bid out. Is there any left?
As any contract is coming up for renewal, we are really looking at seeing what is out there in the market.
Sure.
So I can't think of anybody that we've just automatically renewed with.
Okay. And so we did that, we took that same approach for our employee benefits broker consultant. And Lori, will you take us through the process and bring us up to speed on what administration has done with regards to selecting a consultant for this?
Okay. Our current contract we have expired in February. We did not renew it. We indicated that we would be going on a month-to-month relationship while we went through an RFP process. We selected a team of 6 district employees, all who in some way touch insurance, with the exception of, we also threw a principal in there to get someone who didn't have any ties at all to the process or the agencies, so it came in totally unbiased. We solicited you have a copy of the proposal that was provided. Any agency that contacted us asking to be put on the bidders list, and anyone in the industry that we knew had a strong relationship with what we were looking for was invited to participate. We got 6 of them that responded. Of those 6, the responses were all reviewed, analyzed. We asked 3 finalists to come in for interviews. They were all asked the identical questions. Their responses were rated by each person individually on the team. The matrix that you have been provided is a culmination of all of the scores, and so they were all weighted by the group independently, and then based on that information, you will see that the group is recommending Beneco. All of their references were checked. Anyone that companies or businesses, districts that we were aware of that might have them as a service, we might have, we would contact individuals that weren't necessarily on a reference list. So I believe we really did our due diligence, trying to get to the bottom of, do they really understand self-funded programs? Do they understand districts our size? Do they have experience with on-site clinics? Are they up and current? Are they experts in the area of Affordable Care Act and retirement benefits and the realm of things that are important to us? And so based on that, all of those inquiries and information that we are recommending Beneco be our next broker consultant.
There were 6 or 7 main areas. You kind of went into some details. But generically, can you talk to those 6 or 7 areas? Because you didn't hit them all.
Oh, sure.
But I wanted to give the audience a sense of how comprehensive the
Right.
scoring was.
We looked at the individual account teams, so we wanted to know specifically within the company, who would be our contact? Who would we call for our day-to-day activities? Who was going to be the person overseeing and managing our account? How would questions that pertain to legal advice be answered? Did they have legal on staff? Did they have actuaries on staff? Or how did they gather that information if they didn't maintain a staff of that? We looked at their communication tools, whether it be newsletters, online communications, webinars, sessions that they put on that invite clientele to, those types of things. So we looked at all of the educational pieces that would be available to us that they could provide us. We looked at what they had to offer in the area of wellness. That's one of the areas that we think is very important to our health plan in trying to maintain costs. So what communications were available through their system? What expertise did they have in designing wellness initiatives? What experience have they had working with other clientele where wellness is important? We also looked at their plan management. How comfortable or how familiar were they with self-funded plans like us? What capabilities did they have in-house for auditing the information of a self-funded plan? And what were their reporting capabilities? It's one thing to gather the information. Can you put it in a format that you can give back to us that we can understand and that we can utilize? So we looked at that as well. We wanted to know what experience the account team that they were bringing to us had in the areas of affordable care and OPEB. Those are important considerations to us right now. What does it mean? What is it going to take us to be compliant? What are the concerns that we ought to be asking? What is their expertise? And then finally, we also looked at the fee structure. What's it going to cost us?
Okay. All right, thank you. What questions or discussion do we have on this? Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah, just to be clear, our prior consultant was Willis, which is one of the 3, and we've had good service from Willis overall. I mean, it's not that Willis has been a bad provider.
That's correct. I mean, Willis is one of our finalists, our 3 finalists.
One of our 3 finalists, and one of the things that this particular, a number of areas they graded out high on that leads us to this change was on the Affordable Care Act and the cost of our health care package and trying to get our costs down. And the fact that we can get legal assistance that's fairly local to the district, which is included in the package. So a driver for me in accepting the recommendation is for a fairly quick test of those capabilities being delivered to our committee. So that's one of the reasons why I'm willing to accept the recommendation, because other than that, I don't see a significant grade out differential between the two entities. When I look at the scaling, just a quick question, Lori, it says, on the corner, it says 0, 3, and 5. Was it 0, 3, and 5, or is it 0, 1, 2, 3, and 5, or 0, 3, and 5?
Well, the committee was just instructed to use 0, 3, or 5.
Okay.
We did have some members who just weren't comfortable going from a 0 to a 3 or a 3 to a 0. So we did have some members give us a 2 or a 4. They just couldn't make that much of a distinction. So, but they scored it based on the same assumptions, and then we did average those in.
Okay. Because, and how many members were on the team?
Total of 6.
6 members. Because in terms of the ACA element, the scoring differential was, we had a couple ratings where they kind of cross-balanced each other. Whereas we had a very high rating for the account team for one supplier, that the alternative supplier had a relatively low rating. And then when we flip it down to the bottom on this ACA OPEB thing, it's kind of an opposite type of flip. Not exactly, but very similar.
Right.
So we're more or less trading off a very established relationship with an entity that we know well and have been relatively satisfied with, for a new entity because of the capabilities we're looking for based on what we see coming to us in the future. Is that correct?
Well, the recommendation is because we followed the process and it recommended a leader, but personally, I can tell you, I think the strengths in the company that's being recommended better match what we're looking for going forward.
Well, the strengths were in plan management and ACA for them. The strengths in the existing provider were wellness and account team, okay? And so, not that one scored that much different overall, but when you balance the two, if I was taking the best account team, the best wellness package, I would be going with the existing provider. If I was taking our plan management and ACA, OPEB, I'd be going with the ones that's being recommended. That's what I'm looking in front of me. So if it was a relationship deal, we'd probably stick with Willis, but the way it graded out on here in detail. But the components that we're looking for overall ended up with a higher grade for the group that you recommended.
That's correct.
Okay. So from my perspective, the reason I'm supporting this change is that I'm expecting deliverance on those. Because the relationship, if we're doing it on relationship, we would have stuck with the existing provider.
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? Motions? Mr. O'Brien?
I move for accepting the recommendation to switch consultants from our current consultant to
Benico.
Benico.
Okay.
Benico.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Second by Ms. Madden. Further questions, discussion? Mr. Edlin?
Just for the record that this is a contract for 3 years with a right to terminate by either party with a 90-day notice.
And that's pretty important because as we're getting into a new relationship, we're going to see what that performance looks like. And if we're not feeling like it's there, we can rescind that decision. Is that kind of why you're bringing it up, or?
That's correct, yes. Part of the recommendation with the administration, I guess it covers the timeline of the contract, but the fact that it is a 3-year agreement doesn't mean we're locked into 3 years, the way the contract is structured. So, again, going to Mr. O'Brien's well-pointed out points, we're looking for a little bit different direction in this case. We're hoping to at least look for performance in the area of giving us a little bit more guidance on the Affordable Care Act, and the strengths that they bring to us in the wellness area, are two reasons that we're moving forward with this. But again, we're going to be looking at the performance aspect of this new firm.
Yeah, I do believe, I agree with you, Mr. Edlin, Mr. O'Brien, that we're moving in a little bit different direction. Willis has served us extremely well, transitioning into a self-insured environment, and actually, many of the changes that Act 10 have brought along, they've been very instrumental. Our relationship has been exceptional with them, very trusting, very open and honest relationship. And so I think you hit it right on the head, Mr. O'Brien, that really the changes are more to align us with a consultant who's going to be giving us advice so that we can plan for the future. And some of those areas included the ACA and some of the plan changes that you hinted to. And that's really what we're interested in, is a plan going forward. There's a lot of change that's happening right now at the federal and state level on these items. And we need to have someone who's going to provide us with exceptional guidance. And we want to be ahead of the curve and be proactive as opposed to reactive. And that's how I'm interpreting this also. Other questions or comments? All right, we'll take a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, passes 5-0. Lori, you'll be in touch with Beneco then
I will, yes.
soon? And this is a contract, obviously, that isn't passed until we bring it up to the full board meeting. So at our full board meeting, we will move this forward as a 5-0 recommendation from our committee. But one of the points that I wanted to make is we don't have to wait until beginning of the year, which is July 1st for us. This is something we'd want to take action on right away, correct? That
Right,
change would happen.
We are looking at an April 15th start date.
Okay,
or
that assumes
16th, yeah.
assumes that the full board accepts it too.
That's
So
correct.
okay, all right. Okay, thank you. We'll roll right into that next bidding process that I had talked on and had foreshadowed. We also bid out our audit service and used a similar process. And by the way, this is a process that we used to change a number of contracts this last year to try and give as objective of a thought process to who would be the best match for us from a vendor relationship. And we have been with Clifton, Gunderson, Larson, no, it's Gunderson, Larson, Allen now?
It was Clifton Gunderson, and it's now Clifton Larson Allen.
Clifton, okay. I couldn't remember which of the Clifton, Gunderson,
Yeah, who
was
stayed,
kept.
who went, yes.
and they're our current auditors. And we went out to bid, and why don't you talk us through the bid process for the auditing service?
We followed a very similar process. Throughout the years, we're contacted by firms asking to keep us on a bid list. They would, like to be available to do business for us. So anyone who has inquired was included. We also went through the listing approved by the state of Wisconsin. Those who are currently school district auditors, they keep that available to districts, so we know who's already in the business. They were included as well. Anybody within, I don't know exactly, a reasonable distance to assume they'd be able to commute to us to do the audit. They were all invited to bid. We got, I believe it was 6 responses. One didn't meet the criteria, so was eliminated. So of those 5 that remaining, you'll see there on the matrix. This was a smaller group. It was Joe and I going through and evaluating. I'm afraid I burned some bridges with the other. It's such an extensive process, and honestly, who wants to read these? But so Joe and I did the evaluation process on these, followed up with references, Following the matrix, each firm was scored, and you'll see the results here. The recommendation is Schenck Service Corporation. They are a large firm in Wisconsin. They have 8 different offices, approximately 500 employees. They have a governmental entity body of 50 employees that just do nonprofits and governmental audits. They are familiar with districts our size. They currently have Racine and Kenosha in their mix. And the team that we are being recommended lead those audits as well. So they would be, they know what they're getting into. Shouldn't be any surprises there based on our size. They also, as I mentioned, include Kenosha, which has part of the OPEB litigation that we are involved with. They're one of the 5 as well, so their auditing firm would already be up to speed on what all that entails as far as disclosure requirements and status, so it wouldn't require an additional education process. They would already have that piece down as it relates to us, so. I guess that covers everything. They were all able to meet our timeline. We had a recommended schedule in there to include when field work would need to be taking place. They all could comply with state reporting. There's no concerns there. They're all experienced firms, so. Actually, 4 of the 5 would be fine, but based on the scoring system, Schenck is the one being recommended.
Okay. Questions and comments? Mr. O'Brien?
I'm supporting this change recommendation based on the historical need to make sure that we sometimes change auditors rather than sticking with the same auditor year after year. Our present auditor, just like in our healthcare advisor, has done an excellent job over the years. I don't think the district has any complaints in their performance. It's just that as we ensure the security of how we do things and function, as has been proven in the past, we shouldn't stick with the same auditor year after year after year. And the recommended choice in the grade out indicates that this would be an acceptable change for the district.
Mr. Adlin?
I just wanted to point out on the matrix that although the scoring was relatively close between the second, third, and fourth entities, the Schenck was quite a bit above the rest of the crowd in the overall matrix scoring. So it won't necessarily come down to dollars, although this is the best value for our money, because you have to have an audit that meets certain standards, no matter how you cut it. DPI does require all auditors to be on their list, so you have to be approved and familiar with school district accounting principles. And if you don't hold up to their standards, you won't be on their list. So that kind of levels the playing field in some respects. But again, we don't want to base our decisions just on dollars. So the difference in the weighting on this has an impact on my decision. I will say that I've really enjoyed the auditing reports that we've had with our auditor over the last 6, 7, 8 years, that long. But again, if we go with a different firm, we do have a fresh set of eyes on the district's operations and finances, and that's always important. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to maybe share a thought with the audience. This is the firm that the board is going to rely upon to make sure that financially we are following procedures and that our administration is doing what they need to be doing. So from my perspective, this is probably one of the most important bids, because they are our eyes to come in and look at the details to make sure essentially things are being operated properly here from a fiscal responsibility perspective and a procedural responsibility perspective. So, I do believe that Clifton Larson Allen has done an excellent job there. They've been able to come in and take a look and look for places of weakness and make recommendations, and our administration's been able to work well with them. It's been a good, proper relationship with them. But we need those fresh set of eyes from time to time. For me, this is nothing more than a fresh set of eyes coming in, taking a look at our processes, taking a look at our numbers, and making sure that we're doing and representing everything that we do accurately to our constituents, the public. So this is, for me, of any vendor that we hire, they're the most important. Because they're the ones that we turn to as a board to say, look me in the eye and tell us everything that our administration is telling us is true and accurate. Because if it's not, we're the ones who need to know that, and we need to make the proper changes, because we're ultimately responsible to the public for having accurate information presented. So nothing that Clifton Larson and Allen didn't do. They did their job well. We just need some fresh eyes. Other comments or questions or motions? Mr. O'Brien,
I move for acceptance of the recommendation.
is there a second to that? Further comments or questions?
One last question.
Yes, Mr. O'Brien.
How many people did the review again this time?
This time it was just Joe and myself and consulting with Todd.
Okay. Not that it changes how I plan to go about this, but to me, I should speak up a little bit louder. To me, the challenge I see here is the scoring. When we look at things like the experience factor, I don't think that you can have such a significant delta between Schenck and Clifton Larson. I mean, it's a huge delta. And,
Only 20 points.
well, I see it as 130 to 190 unless I'm looking at it wrong.
Oh, sorry, up a category. Gotcha.
Okay. So it's a big delta, and I just don't see where you could have such a big delta between someone who's experienced with our district and was satisfactory and someone who's not experienced with our district but may have the staff. So those are the type of things. But even with that delta, it wouldn't have changed the overall recommendation because the overall delta was much bigger than the delta in those areas. So.
Well, I can tell you that the reason behind that, in my thoughts, I excluded us because I'm looking to see what experience from other places they can bring in. So what other like-size entities can they gain experience from that might benefit us? That was the thought process behind that particular one.
Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, I wouldn't have done it that way, but that's the problem with only 2 assessors. But there's no doubt that what we're switching to is more than capable of handling our business.
Mr. Edlin?
I just had one question, Lori. I don't want to mention names of the lowest vendor on here, but there's a comment down the bottom, too expensive, too many hours. Does that mean that the audit is more thorough, possibly? Is that why there's more hours?
It means they're inexperienced with districts our size and don't have an understanding really of what it takes. If you look at everybody else, they're all fairly close. So, in our opinion, it was not that, they probably would have been more thorough, would have maybe done more testing. But it also would have consumed a lot more of our time. Whether it be mine, Joe's, or the staff's.
Okay. Again, they're working for us and not for you.
True.
So I see that as a subjective viewpoint rather than an objective viewpoint. Because I kind of take this as you'd be spending more money, but they're gonna be digging a little bit more.
And it may or may not. I don't,
Okay.
yeah, I don't
I guess
know
that's
where
my
they'd put
question.
the hours, whether it was be back in their office or if it would be on site. I can't tell you that.
Sure, you could spend a lot more time in report preparation than you can actual auditing.
Ms. Madden?
Also note at the top, there are many typos and errors in the proposal. We don't need that.
Especially for an audit.
Especially for-
That was one of the concerns, that is our audit report gonna look like the proposal?
Especially when you go out for bonding.
All right, further questions or comments? Mr. O'Brien?
I just want to make it clear, for me, it's a wash between the two, other than the fact that we need to have a little bit of cross-checking by changing auditors now and then. When we haven't done that in the past, we haven't been well-served, so that's the only reason why I support this recommendation. It's not because of difference in quality, per se, even though it graded out differently.
All right, let's take a vote on this. So the motion is to accept Schenk as the new proposed auditor. And how long is the contract?
This is a 3-year.
Three-year contract, Lori?
Correct.
For a 3-year contract. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes 5-0, Lori. And please make sure for both Clifton, Larson Allen, and Willis, let them know how appreciative we are of the services that they have provided in the past.
Certainly will.
Okay. And we do have one more action item tonight, and we're looking at, it's that time of the year again, we're looking at student fees. Our student fees stay the same if we don't act prior to, I believe, June 1st, or is it June 30th? June 30th? They just stay the same. It just defaults over if we don't actively change those fees.
I think it's June 1.
Okay.
Because handbooks have to go out.
Right.
Schools want to disseminate that information, so.
Right. And we're looking at making some tweaks, but pretty small tweaks to the student fees. Laura, would you take us through administration's recommendation?
Correct. We are still under the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act, and the requirement that we increase our lunch prices, all of our meal prices that are qualifying for federal reimbursement, so that the full-priced lunch or breakfast is not being subsidized by the federal funding we get for free or reduced lunches and breakfasts. So to continue on that pattern, we are required to increase prices that are not in compliance by at least a nickel, not more than a dime, to qualify and to continue to get our federal funding. Within the worksheet, you'll see there's some of the numbers to show you where we are targeted to go. For lunch prices, the average price that we need to get to is $2.65. We currently at the elementary level are at $2.05 and $2.30 for secondary. So we are working towards increasing to make up that 47.5-cent difference. I'm recommending that we increase prices a nickel to move us towards that mark. And then you'll notice the adult lunch price currently is $2.90. A totally unsubsidized meal is $3. We currently, it would be $3.22 1/4. And so my recommendation is that we increase that to be compliant, and to save the pennies, I'm rounding it to $3.25. And then under breakfast, we are compliant with the average prices. So there is a differential between the size of the portions at elementary versus secondary, and it's the average that has to be compliant. So while we, you'll notice the target is $1.30, the elementary is not there, but the secondary is priced higher, so in average, we're at $1.50. So there isn't a need to increase that price there. With the exception of the elementary adult price for breakfast. That target is $1.67, and we're currently at $1.50. So the recommendation would be to bring that up to $1.70, so that we are not subsidizing any of the adult prices. And that is the only recommendations for changes.
So all the other fees would remain the same?
Correct.
Athletic fees,
Parking,
books,
technology.
parking? And we do also have the comparison chart, so we get a sense of what other districts are doing in the last page, which is always important to make sure at least we're in line with what our neighboring districts are doing.
We need to thank Hamilton Sussex. They do that study every year for us, so.
Oh, that's who we get this from?
They do they
And they
survey all
share
the
it.
districts, and they
Excellent.
share it with all of us who participate. So.
We do need to thank them.
So it saves us all having to recreate that wheel.
Yeah. Questions and comments? Motions? Mr. Edlin?
I'd like to make a motion to, for food service meal prices to be increased by 5 cents for elementary lunches and secondary lunches, and increased adult elementary breakfast prices to $1.70 and adult lunch prices to $3.25 to comply with the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act.
Second.
Second by Mr. McCaffrey. Further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes, Lori, 5-0. And it's the, do you have any projections, Lori, potentially for next year that as you were looking through these, that you think might come up next year?
You mean as we're looking for
Yeah,
15,
looking
16?
forward a year, I mean, were there any things that you were like saying, well, this year we shouldn't change it, but maybe we should be looking at that next year?
I think a year out, we'll be looking at the technology fee and the materials book fee, and see if we need to alter that now that are starting to replace technology.
Sure.
It's taking over what.
E-books
the-
on
the-
our iPads and
The
that sort
textbooks
of
and the
thing.
materials. So I think a year from now, when we have everybody phased in, we'll want to revisit that.
Okay. All right, we'll make sure that the crystal ball makes that one come true, at least from a review perspective, so. Okay, we're now moving into the information items portion of our meeting. Joe, will you please take us through the monthly budget update for this last month?
Certainly. The general fund budget report for March, in property taxes for local sources, we received $1,145,000 in property taxes, and that brings us fiscal year to date. We've collected 74% of the adopted levy, compared to 73% collected through the same period last year. And then for revenue for state sources and federal sources, there was $985,000 in categorical aid and $12.4 million in equalization aid received. And funding from federal sources included 3 various grants. And the totals for that were $97,000 for the IDEA CSIS grant, $31,000 for another Title II grant, and $12,123 for a Title III grant. So overall, in the general fund fiscal year-to-date, the district has received 66.96% of the annual revenues anticipated, compared to 65.74% last year. And then moving into our expenditures, starting with our salaries and benefits, the district has spent 61.85% of the budgeted amount for salaries year-to-date, compared to 61.63% last year. And I'd like to point out the difference in salaries and benefits from last March, if you look at the column on the far left, is due to $821,000 in retro pay. And this is just due to the timing of the retro pay. The difference in salaries on a year-to-date basis is due to the retro payments being made, and they were accrued at the end of 12/13 as opposed to being paid in March of this year. So overall, that would even out. In employee benefits, the amount spent year-to-date is 61.99% compared to 65.12%. And then part of that difference is the early retirement insurance from last year. Because we weren't self-insured, we were paying that a little bit before the month started. So we paid our April 2013 expense of $329,000 in March. And of course, with us being self-insured, we do not have to do that. And the self-insured claims payable analysis has been attached for your review at the end of this packet. And then going into purchase services, I mean, you'll see that our gas utility costs have increased 63.9% year-to-date, or $253,000. So that was a big hit that we took.
It's natural gas?
Yes. And if you look at, the timing on that, if you look at maybe the past 4 or 5 years, there's different spikes based on, when it started to warm up, and it's just based on the weather conditions if you look at the past 4 or 5 years. But this year we took a big hit.
And don't we also buy in bulk, or have the contract set in terms of what our price is gonna be for long periods of time?
Right now, we do not. The market price for natural gas had been so low compared to what you could buy it in long-term rate, that we don't have any locked in.
Okay. Are we still feeling that that's better right now?
We're having those
or-
conversations, so I think later in spring, we'll see prices start to drop again, and then we'll look at if it makes sense to lock in for next year.
When did we change that policy? Or when did we change that practice?
When natural gas rates dropped so significantly. It was gonna cost us more on the futures market than we currently were paying.
But we were locked in with the contract, when you say what we were currently paying, but were we locked into a contract before we decided to do that? Or that was just what the market was bearing at the time versus what we were paying?
At the time, when the purchases were no longer, when we had no locked-in rates, we had, prior to my starting, we had some locked-in, and then as I think it was year 3 came due, we were paying a lot more for those contracts than we would have if we'd bought them on a spot market. So in that particular case, it cost us more. While we knew what we were going to pay, it ended up being higher than what the current market was running. So at the time when those came off contract, I did not enter into new contracts because at that point, the market was still declining.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have on whether it's good practice or not. I mean, you look at the flip side of that. Thank darn goodness that we locked into the propane contract that we did. We might not have been able to get propane for our buses. So not that we wouldn't be able to get natural gas for our schools, but, it's all on dollar cost averaging in some cases. When you lock into a price, you hope you win or lose, but if it's at the low point, I would have wanted to lock in.
Well,
Yeah.
and we're still having those conversations.
Right. Okay.
Typically, winter is not the time to lock into
No.
a futures contract for natural gas.
Right, okay, thank you.
And then going into what you were speaking about with our transportation agreement, if you combine both our regular and our special education pupil transportation and fuel invoices, year-to-date, the reduction from last year is $787,000 or 16.9%. So overall in the general fund, the district has spent $77.89 million, or 53.35% of the budget, compared to $75.87 million, or 54.67% expended by the same time last year. Then going over to Fund 27, which is our special education fund, which has been included for your review, there was $970,000 in state handicapped aid and $512,000 in federal aid received during the month. Total special education fund revenue year-to-date is 22.41%, compared to 23.47%. The district has spent 58.17% of the budgeted amount for salaries year-to-date, compared to 59.27% last year. And the total employee benefits amount spent is 56.41%, compared to 59.44% last year. And again, talking about the March, teacher retro pay, the salary and benefits total was $217,000. And again, that's just due to the timing of when the retro pay was done compared to the previous year. And in purchase services, pupil transportation and fuel expense has decreased $593,000 from last year to date. And total special education fund expenditures year to date were $15.55 million, or 55.74%, compared to $16.756 million, or 59.6% the previous year. That concludes the review of the budget report for March.
Okay. Other questions, Mr. Edlin?
Yeah, that's a significant drop in the cost on the fuel expense for pupil transportation. I know the current practice right now, because they didn't have a storage tank built, but is their ability to store fuel on site going to affect our costs in any way? I mean, it has to be costing them a whole lot more to have the fuel delivered by a vendor, having trucks come out to refuel the buses every day, and I don't know if that impacts us or impacts them.
They have a long-term agreement with Farrell. In fact, they have a national agreement with Farrell. So they're working closely with them on the off-site filling. My understanding is that tank is now in place.
Yeah, they were waiting on the weather to break to finish that up. Will that reduce our costs to have that tank in place? I guess that's what I'm asking. Is it gonna?
No, my understanding is
neither
no.
way. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions or comments on March 2014? Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah, just to restate, what was that? This is the first year of our new provider on transportation, right?
Yes.
And which got a lot of attention when we made the switch, or when my fellow board members made the switch. I had nothing to do with it.
We'll give you credit. No, we're not that way.
What was the savings from the prior year that you stated, Joe?
Right now, we're looking at a savings year-to-date of $787,000.
That was,
Yeah, I don't think any board member should take credit for that.
Least of all you.
At least of all me, yes. But I do think it's important that figure gets publicized. The district could even issue a press release on that regard, so that the public does know that, you know, when we make some of these decisions, they might seem unfair and unreasonable, but when it comes to managing our taxpayers' dollars, so that they're used more for education than paying outside vendors, is paramount to the board. And this is a good example of that. And I'll give my prior board members credit for making a difficult decision from again, another supplier that we were relatively happy with.
Yeah. You have to give administration the credit. They brought that forward to us, especially Ms. Clifton.
You guys get all the heat.
It's part of my job.
just on that topic, though, that's not the total dollar cost savings.
No.
The total cost savings is much higher, and it's even gets, what I'm gonna say, even higher than higher, if we were to have continued with the previous vendor's contract without taking it to bid, there's even an extra sum that would have been on top of that. And I think having those numbers at the end of the year, when we know exactly when we're done, what those are, we will well, this board won't be surprised, but I think our constituents may be surprised at what that final number is. It's a pretty big number. So I think we should, I agree with Mr. O'Brien that a press release on this, I think, would be really important, and I think we should let our constituents know. But let's let them know at the end of the year, so we have that.
We have the totals.
Yeah. Mr. O'Brien.
Well, I would rather that one press release doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, we have specifically a very concrete delta from the prior year.
Say so far.
Well, it's not going to change
No,
that much.
multiple.
But it's a concrete delta, and I think, we should publicize it, and there should be a press release. And then if we want to do another one that's of a different scope and magnitude later, that's fine. But clearly, when you think about propane as being a fuel, I would have guessed that if we'd written the contract wrong, we would have been feeling quite a bit of pain. Okay, so the fact the contract was written to protect us from this propane increase, or that we were protected in some way, is helpful, because I know there was escalators in the old agreements for gas prices and stuff like that were so non-transparent, okay, that it was hard to make a decision as to whether you were getting a good deal or not.
Mr. Edlin?
And I just wanted to add that, although the cost of propane did spike this year because of the unusually cold weather that we had, the way the free market works is where there's always a demand, there will be a dollar to be made. And what this is going to do is increase the supply side of propane. In talking to, when our new vendor First Student had their open house, the gentleman that did the presentation to whoever wanted to go on a tour of it, when I was looking at the 5 diesel buses that we do have, the very largest buses, he said First Student is even reviewing that concept because there are currently strategies being developed, negotiations taking place to develop propane refueling stations along interstates so that buses, like the largest buses that we have that are diesel, will then be able to take long trips. And that's the only reason that we have 5 diesel buses, which are the largest, is because we needed the range. So the market will change. The market's going to change tremendously over the next 10 years, as we all know. So I only see positive things coming about. The busing company is extremely happy with the performance of the buses. They've run very well. So it was a very good decision by the administration to bring this forward to us, and it worked out in every positive way so far.
It was a good winter to test those.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, this was the winter
This
to
was.
make that test, so.
Yeah.
I do have one other question, Joe, on account 299, early retirement. We're roughly at about 3 million, and we're projecting a little over 4.1 million. I just don't know the payouts of that. Are we gonna see that hit 4.1, or are we pretty much done on that, or how's that work?
Included in that category would be any retirement benefits we would pay out for new retirees. So any ASHRA reduction that they may claim as part of a retirement benefit, they are eligible for a small stipend at retirement. So there are things that do not come in evenly throughout the 12 months. We will see a larger burst in June.
Okay,
So yes, I believe we will hit that number.
all right.
Take a long way to get there, but
Yeah,
And there was just a slight timing difference, because right now with the way we're funding our insurance, it's right on the money instead of paying it a month in advance.
okay, that's good. And then I just want to ask one more question with regards to cash flow. Are we still, have our projections held up for the year? We're still doing fine?
We're ahead of the projections, so
Okay.
we're sitting fine cash-wise.
Okay. Okay, good. Why don't we move on to our next information item? Now we're getting out the bigger crystal ball, trying to take a look at the budget for 2014, 2015. You first presented us with your assumptions. Well, we had a few assumptions, but your best stab at the numbers, and now you have a few more assumptions that you can take into consideration, Lori. Why don't you take us through where we're at this time?
At this point, we haven't changed anything on the revenue side. The numbers that we looked at last month are still in place. What we have done is expanded to include a projection for the expenditure side, using a roll-up concept, existing staff rolling forward, department budgets rolling forward, and then adjusting for those known differences. So in this case, you'll see utilities have been projected for what we believe is a realistic 14-15 budget. It takes into consideration slight increase in rates, but based on an average usage, not what we've currently experienced in the last year for natural gas, for example. We've been in contact with the utility, water utility in Waukesha, and asked them what to anticipate for rate increases. So the water and sewer rates are based on their information that they've provided to us. So we are starting to lock in those pieces. We are in the process of one more RFP. This will be for our property and casualty insurance area. Once we get a broker consultant in place for that, we will go out for bid on those lines of insurance. So the projection we have here is premature. We know once we go through the RFP process, those numbers could go up or down, but again, as a projection, you have to base it on a roll-up. You base it with what you know at the current time. The area of capital leases, it includes the Apple leases. It projects that we will have 2 more waves next year, and it caps out the available funding at $3 million, which was one of the restrictions on the board-approved project for Waukesha 1. So it takes those restrictions in place. Those are factored in. It also includes the 2 Cisco leases that we have. The one we had a year or so ago with the infrastructure upgrades to go wireless in our buildings, and then the one recently with the telephone system. So those are all factored in there. We are digging into the retirement benefits at this point, so this is just a roll-up. As we look at plan design changes and those types of things, we will refine that number and get a more solid number as the pieces fall into place. You'll see transportation, we've projected that's a 2.5% increase. That is based on contract language. So it's the escalator built into our current contract. And then we also have this nice long list of special projects, whether it be program changes that sites are asking for, additional staffing, replacement of equipment or furniture, renovations to buildings. We have a $4.8 million list of wants and needs, depending on who you talk to, that we will prioritize as executive team to determine what is based on curriculum and student needs, what is based on safety, what staff are needed to keep our ratios in accordance with policy. Those would be our priorities as we wade through those lists and see what we can afford, and look at areas that are considered needs rather than wants. Okay. So we are in that process. We meet weekly as these numbers get firmed up.
Okay. Questions? Comments? Mr. Edlin?
Administration was given a direction this year to increase the maintenance budget by quite a bit, and I'm not seeing that in here.
It would be part of those department budgets.
Okay. Isn't that really a breakout, though, department budgets? I don't,
Well, the sheet we're working off is multiple pages.
Summary,
Yeah, but in order to get
Sure,
it presentable to you, I had to somehow consolidate. But we are looking at all those, each individual department has their budget they're developing.
got me a little confused with the headers up here, up on the top. It says Fund 10, Fund 27. What is that following? I'm not sure.
Each one of those columns represents so the general fund is Fund 10.
Okay.
Fund 27 is our special education fund.
Got it.
So we're looking at them together,
Just combine everything.
just
in
combining,
Fund-
because they're all supported by the revenue side,
Okay.
whether it be our tax levy and state aid. So I was trying to give you a more comprehensive
Sure.
picture by including them
Summary.
together. And this, the numbers presented are exclusive of grants. Grants, revenue comes in and it supports the program, and so they're self-sufficient. I didn't want to muddy the waters by including, where some years we have them and other years we don't, and so this is
You'll muddy 'em later.
truly- Exactly.
You will.
It will come on its own, so, we tried to get this exclusive of grants so that you could see the local impact on the taxes.
Are there going to be recommendations to borrow at all coming from administration, Fund 40s, the 40s funds, I'm thinking?
The capital improvement plan is still recommended to be in place at the same level. This year, it was $1,125,000. We aren't looking at changing that. But that will depend on once we get through all of those identified projects. Because some of those, if it's a facility renovation type thing, that goes in Fund 41. If there isn't a long list of those things and more maintenance types things, they end up going in Fund 10.
Okay.
So the projects in total, we aren't going to lose dollars for our facilities, but it might be a different bucket, depending on the definition.
Any thought given to borrowing under revenue caps to take care of some of our long-term maintenance needs?
Not at this point. We are not looking. Are you referring to borrow under the revenue cap for?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the interest rates are so low right now that I thought that was part of our prior conversation was to,
Well, we can't go to, we can't just go to a bank and borrow. We would have to issue bonds. Or
Right.
do a capital lease type structure.
yeah.
We're a little more restricted on funding sources without referendum.
Financing the debt can be done within revenue limits? Where
Correct.
we wouldn't need to go out and go to referendum?
Correct, but it would still either be a capital lease type arrangement or a bond issuance, note issuance. You can still pay for the note and interest payments, but it's not just a line of credit, if you will.
Right, but do we need to go to referendum to bond?
Not if you're going to repay it within
Right,
the cap.
that's what I'm getting at is instead of trying to budget every year to pay for these capital improvement projects with cash, in my opinion, we should, because the interest rates are so low, we should be borrowing and making the payments under revenue limits. We should be bonding to, make this happen while it's so cheap. Instead of every year we come back and we keep, plugging away at doing projects and scrimping every nickel to get the project done because it's within our budget. But it makes much more sense to be able to tackle bigger projects. Use that same amount of money that we're spending on to make payments on the little projects we're tackling to be able to get some of this stuff done within the district.
Mr. O'Brien?
Well, I think you make a good point, Mr. Edlin, and the only thing I would add to that is we should have a broader review and discussion of the needs of the facilities like we did several years back, so we could define at what level we would need to fund things that need to be done in the district, just like we did several years back when we did go to referendum and had the support of the community, because I'm reluctant to just pick and choose at a small number when our needs may be much bigger than that. Some of that could be funded, from within the budget, but maybe not all of it could be. So I think it's better for us to have the bigger picture, and I think that's something we should work on over the next year, is get a full and complete picture, and then we can look at whether it can just be strictly funded within our own revenue limits, or whether we have to go beyond that. So I would agree with you.
Yeah, we did that last year, and I thought this was the direction that we were headed, and that's why I'm kind of surprised to see this recommendation, because again, I'm gonna hit on the fact that interest rates are, we're in historic lows. And, we've got a huge list of capital improvement projects that we don't need to go to referendum to. If we can go out there and borrow, go to, bond for, $10 to $15 million and take care of some of those projects Mr. Norders had on his list for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and make the payment back with the amount of money that we're spending doing one project at a time within our budget, I think it's money well spent.
We are in the process of having each school reviewed. An architectural study is being done to determine structure needs, safety needs, and maybe curricular needs. So we are having that done before we make recommendations.
Okay.
So we have a basis for each building.
All right, that's an update, because we haven't heard that before.
Okay.
So you're talking to somebody who's just hearing this for the first
Okay.
time, and I'm kind of bouncing this back at you going, where's the direction that we kind of gave? And
Yeah.
thank you for the
Yeah.
update.
You might refer, we call it a facilities plan, so I don't know if we're mixing it, but it's really a facilities plan, and with
Yeah.
the facilities plan comes how you fund the needed repairs.
Yeah, that was,
And
We wanted an
I think-
independent study to identify the needs.
right. I was hoping it would have moved along.
I would summarize that we have done a good job of identifying, and we've done a good job of separating wants from needs. I mean, because remember when we first saw that list, I don't know, what was it, 35 million, 40 million? I don't remember what it was, but I think everyone on this committee looked at that and said, there are wants in here, not just needs. So we went through that process. So I think we've done a pretty good job of the identification. Now what we need is, what are we gonna do about it? And we took a baby step last year, right, in increasing some of the funds. But I really do think that was a baby step. What we're asking for is a plan. And I think the time has come, and we've said this for many, many years, and we need that plan. And I think we're echoing the same thing that we're saying with our employee benefits. We want to make sure that we have a plan in place and that we execute that plan, as opposed to making the best guess with what we have moving forward and hoping to move in the right direction. We want to set clear goals, and we want to have clear communication on what's going to be important, consensus on that, and then how do we move forward with the solution there. So, and that has been a struggle of this district for a number of years. It just has been. I'm not sure why, but I think we hear, although you weren't really frustrated, Mr. Adlin, but I think you hear some of the frustrations kind of resurfacing. You heard some of these same comments last year. They're echoing again. We just want to get to the solution. It's time.
There's things in Mr. Norder's budget that I have grave concerns about, being in the HVAC industry. I'm telling you guys, we're in trouble. We are in serious trouble. We've got, computer systems right now controlling buildings that you can't get parts for. I mean, we're replacing phone systems. You wait until you got a school building that you've got no heat in the classrooms in the middle of winter when it's, sub-zero. I'm going to throw this on the technology committee.
We saw
But we
that
might have to
motion.
we might have to take care of the HVAC
That
stuff
would-
then
We
too.
might have to, because you know what, you guys, that's another point that I wanted, I'll have to talk about you privately.
am I
This is
gonna have-
something I want agendized.
Am I going to have to sit
Point of
between
order.
you two?
Point of order. I think we're way off topic, okay?
But
Yeah.
Fair
Thank
enough.
you.
We
I've
have
said my
important
piece.
people
Thank you.
waiting for the next topic,
that's
and I think
exactly
we're
right.
way
I
off
would agree
topic.
100%.
The,
That's what I
any
have on
other
the 14-15
comments?
budget.
Any other comments, Lori, that you want to make on what are we to expect for this next round of information for us?
So we are continuing to fine tune those numbers. As we do, obviously, it changes the bottom line. We are scheduled based on your board calendars to bring you a complete budget package at the June board meeting.
Okay,
And we are still on target to do that.
okay, thank you. Thank you. And we'll move on to our last, but definitely not least, important item of the evening, to have a discussion on possibly renaming Central Middle School. We have been approached by the Les Paul Foundation to rename Central Middle School after Les Paul. And we have a policy in place for renaming buildings. And Todd, do you want to report out on where we stand with, part of that policy is forming a committee?
Sure, yeah, there's actually a couple of committees that are working on this. The policy calls for citizens committee, which includes the teachers, administrators, citizens, and so on. And then there's a second committee made up of central folks, primarily teachers and parents and so on. Both are working at this point. The one committee, the citizen committee, has generally recommended to proceed with this to the facilities and then to the board in general. The other, I'm still waiting for final results from the central committee and from central staff at this point. I wanted to use tonight primarily to see if there's any questions by the board that we need to answer for the May meeting, because at that point, depending on the level of recommendation for that, we may be, that could be an action item. So what I'm looking for tonight is simply just requesting any questions you might have or things that we can research or concerns that we can research for the May F&F meeting in the event that it becomes an action item.
Okay. And we also have a representative from the Les Paul Foundation here this evening, Sue Baker. And so we can ask questions too of Sue. So what questions might we have to bring forth, Mr. O'Brien?
Well, I believe that she might want to make an opening commentary about the situation. And
Yeah, we can, Sue, why don't you come forward and give us a little bit of background and give us a sense of why now, and we probably can guess why Les Paul, but we'd like to hear it in your words.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm Sue Baker, and I do live in Waukesha, and I've lived in Waukesha a very long time. As a little background for myself, I've also worked with the children in the schools in various roles over the years. So I feel very personally attached to the children in our school district. I am the program director for the Les Paul Foundation in New York City, but I still work live in Waukesha, which is great. I gave each of you a copy of this piece of paper, which sort of summarizes why Les Paul. Just briefly, Les was born in Waukesha. He went to school in Waukesha. I went to Park Elementary School, which is now the Barstow Medical Building at Barstow and St. Paul. But then he went to Waukesha Junior High School and then Waukesha High School, which, as you well know, are now combined into Central Middle School. It would be a great honor for Les to have his schools named after him. But to me, what's more important is I think that having Central Middle School be called Les Paul Middle School will be an opportunity to inspire the students that go there. Because Les Paul lived in very economically challenging times. He lived in a single parent household in the 1920s when not too many kids did. His mom had $6 a week for herself and her two sons. So you know it was tight going there. But Les has told me over the years, and I've heard him tell other people too, that it was the teachers in the Waukesha School District that eagerly answered his questions. Excuse me, they took time to answer his questions, to help him find answers to, why does the train sound differently when it passes my house? And why does the phonograph sound differently when I slow it down, but when my mom's player piano slows down, the sound is not different? And those are wonderful curiosity things that Les Paul discovered, and things that we can use to inspire our kids. This is an image of Les Paul when he was still going to school here. This was when he was about 16 or 17 years old, and he was already a professional musician. And he has said on many occasions, it was because the people of the city of Waukesha kept encouraging me. They told me to keep going. They applauded me. My teachers told me to keep studying about sound. What a great testimony to our school district, to our city. Les Paul wanted to give himself back to Waukesha. That's why he chose to be buried here. He was always introduced as the Wizard of Waukesha. My bottom line is, I think renaming Central Middle School to Les Paul Middle School is an opportunity to inspire the students of Waukesha, to show them that they too could possibly be Waukesha's next Les Paul.
Hey, thank you, Sue. And Sue, you've had a chance too to present to these two committees that are working at Central?
The committee of the community I talked to.
Okay. All right. So they've had a chance to hear you at
Yeah.
least. At least one, okay.
Right, and 2015 would be the 100th birthday of Les Paul, so there will be celebrations nationwide, and we would like to make this a really big celebration.
What questions might we have? Mr. Edlin?
I'm really glad that you're doing this, Sue, and thank you, because you're an absolute saint for I've seen you sitting in the audience over a number of meetings, and you're an absolute saint for sitting through some of them. I got a Christmas card this year, a very unusual card. It was somebody who, make a long story short, lived in the house that I live in, which was built in 1925. Lived there in the 1980s and learned to play drums. And he was about, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. Sent a Christmas card this year addressed to 1980 David. And the return address was 2013 David. I didn't know what the heck to make out of this. And just over the last few weeks, I've been able to connect with this individual. He now lives in Boston, Massachusetts. And, of course, he moved away a long time ago from Waukesha. So in our email correspondence, I said, did you know that Les Paul grew up in Waukesha? And he was just buried here not too long ago. And his email response was, I knew he was from the Midwest, but I had no idea he was from Waukesha. How cool. Well, David went on to play in a band for 6 years. Still plays the drums quite frequently. So the bottom line is that I'm going to be scanning this tonight and sending it to David. And I like your idea. I think it's an important part of our cultural heritage in Waukesha. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Milwaukee, but to be able to identify with something as important as this. So I guess the only question I had for administration was, should future boards decide that we are going to have a different junior high school, can we put in a motion that the name go with another building? I mean, I'd like to keep the continuity there, but who knows? I mean, I don't want to all of a sudden see us lose that identity, but, if it's put in the original motion, that way at least the name is in perpetuity no matter what.
The Les Paul Foundation owns all rights to Les's name. Since we approach the school board, that's not an issue for this, but I can't speak for
Another
Okay.
building?
Understand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah, I think the challenge is getting the first school named. That might not be as easy as, I travel a lot, and no matter where I go in the world, if I mention Les Paul, everybody knows who Les Paul is, and it's everybody who's ever touched a guitar. And not all of them know the sound part of it, which I do know about that part of it, but they do know Les Paul and Gibson and this part of it. Some years back, we were asked about finding if we could change one of our schools to name them after someone who was a national figure, maybe international figure. But he had no connection to our community. In this case, we're fortunate to have somebody who has an international background, and it's not an ego thing, obviously. Les has passed on and contributed 90-some wonderful years to our communities. And I think it's a great idea that you came and brought this to the consideration of the Waukesha community. It will be the community that will decide, of course, through their input as to whether the board proceeds with approval of their recommendation to do this or not do this. But I can't think of a more fitting individual for something like this, given his accomplishments, his background, and his commitment to Waukesha through his entire life. And I do think that there's some cost issues that we're going to have to probably sit down and make sure that we have dealt with in terms of how much do we want to do relative to the school to, if we should decide to proceed, to relabel it. Which I'm sure somehow or another we can work all that out, if that's what we decide. But I do think if we're going to do something like this, we should decide sooner rather than later so we can have enough time to plan the process, so to speak. So I'd encourage administration to get things moving along as far as what the recommendation will be from the committees, and so we can do an adequate amount of planning should we have to make such a change.
May I comment to that?
Oh, sure, Sue, go ahead.
We've made a recommendation, and I've talked to Todd and the committee about this. The Les Paul Foundation understands that there would be cost in changing the name of the school, and I talked to Rob Bennett a bit about it, and he said, well, it's not a high school, so we don't have a ton of athletic uniforms. There's some things. And basically, our comment is show us a budget for what the cost will be. And the Les Paul Foundation will work with the school district on making sure things happen that way.
Mr. Bryan.
And does the Les Paul Foundation have a board of directors?
There are 3 trustees. I am a staff member, but I am like your staff members at all meetings and have input.
Well, hopefully they treat you better than...
Oh.
But who are the trustees?
Michael Brownstein, who was Les Paul's business manager, is the executive director of the Les Paul Foundation, and he is one of the trustees. The other one is Jeff Salmon, who lives in Los Angeles and was a close friend of Les's. And the third one is Arlene Palmer, who lives in New Jersey and was a close friend. Basically, everyone in the Les Paul Foundation was a very close friend of Les Paul, both trustees and the 3 staff members.
Okay. So are there any other connections as far as people from the area that are fairly significant that would say they were influenced by Les Paul in some way?
Oh, I think you could find a number of people. Paul Rackus, who was the long-term mayor of Waukesha, became very good friends with Les Paul. I mean, there's a long list.
Long list. It's too long to go over, huh?
Yeah, I think it probably is.
Yeah. Well, we have the Bodines originally from here, and of course they, at least Sam did it at the Guitar Town benefit. And I think the first cassette tape I bought was Steve Miller, who
was Les's godson.
Yeah, so that was the first cassette tape I bought, and so I just, to me, when you look at potential opportunities to honor somebody, I'd expect the next person to have a tough act to follow if we should do this. So.
Can I get questions? I mean, I understand, I mean, I know we're debating the issue at this point, but it's not a fraction. I'm just looking for, I got one, cost issues of doing this. I've got that in place. Is there anything else that I can provide for you other than the information we have and the recommendations of the committees?
I had one other, just wondering if there's any other expectations that the Les Paul Foundation has in this partnership.
There is no expectation on our part. There is an offer to work with any of the schools that would like to incorporate any information about Les, but there's no expectation at all. I mean, as a little reference for you, the Les Paul Foundation is working with the Wisconsin DPI on developing a cross-subject curriculum that will start out statewide. It's being tested this year. But after it goes to statewide, it will be on a website that will be available to anyone in the world. So there's a number of projects that are available. We work a lot with schools and educational programming, but there's no expectation related to renaming the school. The hope is to rename the school, and if Rob Bennett and the others, the teachers at the school, want to infuse some information about Les Paul, I am more than happy to provide it to them in any form I can, and I have a fair number of ways of doing that.
I didn't know if there might be potential like ceremonial kinds of requests or that kind of thing, but maybe that's just going to kind of play out in the partnership and over time kind of thing.
If the school is renamed, we would like to make it a big event, and we've had some discussion with Rob about, I feel it's really, really important that the students be intimately involved, that this be not only a ceremony for the students in our community, but they be very active in
engaged
creating it,
in it.
so that it's theirs.
Okay. Mr. Edlin?
Sure, Brian was first. You go ahead.
First.
Oh, Mr. McCaffrey.
We'll
We'll go Mr. McCaffrey.
Just to answer Mr. Gray, or stay on Mr. Gray's topic that he brought up. Because Les Paul's name is proprietary to the foundation, correct?
Right.
I think part of this would have to be some sort of definition as to avoid any problems going forward in how the school uses the name. And so we'll have to have that clear as part of the change. Certainly we don't want to run into any down the road speed bumps for something that wasn't expected on our part and on your part. So that would be something we'd have to have cleared up.
And I'm expecting we get a release if they wanted the names on the apparel that the schools sell, we would have to get a release that those kind of things are okay. Or other things like, if we have some of those, maybe they have a robotics team in the news, that there'd be no issue with publicizing using that name, so.
Yeah, I think we'd have to get a pretty broad release for things that are relative to the school
Right.
itself. And obviously, we're not out to market Les Paul's name, but we do have to be able to
Right.
do what we normally do in a school with, west and north and south and Randall and
Sure.
all those things. So I think that's one thing that we better make sure we iron out
Yeah.
as part of the process.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Yeah, that was my concern too, because the name will be printed quite a bit, and used in printed material. So the name would have to be attached to the district for use as well.
Something that's a little bit parallel that might relieve some of your concerns is the museums that currently have Les Paul exhibits like the Waukesha one and Discovery World and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We allow them to use the name. I agree that we should have a formal agreement so that there's no questions, but I don't anticipate any problems.
Have you run into any problems with any of the other organizations
Not really.
ever?
No, not as long as the foundation has been around.
Okay. Mr. Edlin?
I guess, Todd, this is a question that I would want to inject into the same vein of conversation, is there a copyrighted image with Les Paul? In other words, if we want to all of a sudden put a guitar on the school underneath the name or something like that, an outline of a guitar, is there anything that the Les Paul Foundation has rights to in that area?
The image of the guitar, the solid Gibson Les Paul solid body electric guitar is owned by Gibson, and the use of the name Les Paul on the Gibson guitar is owned by Gibson. That's something Les worked out a long time ago. All of the uses of Les's name, his iconic signature, like on the top of the page I gave you, are all property of Les Paul. So an image of the guitar is not something that the Les Paul Foundation controls, but his images are something we can control, that we do control, and I don't anticipate a problem.
His image.
His image.
His image, okay. So
Yes.
if we wanted to just put a guitar underneath his name and hang it on the outside of the school, just as an example, that's not a problem.
I'm sure we can work.
I guess that's a question
I'm
that I
picturing
have.
two big guitars holding the sign.
There you go.
Now Todd's a designer. Mr. O'Brien?
I'm sure if we should decide to move ahead with this, because, I don't want to prejudge it, there's probably things we could work out with Gibson as well relative to how we portray the school. Mentioned Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I guess if they moved here, maybe it'd be a lot easier decision.
All right. Any other questions that
Again,
we might
I will
have?
have information, I will have the recommendations from the committees, and I'm sure we'll hear from people in the community. We would like to hear from them in some format or another on this, and so we'll be developing a one-page bullet point item. I do want to caution, there have been some issues that, does this make Central the next step after Summit View with integrated arts, and that is not all tied. They're two completely separate issues. Now, do we need an integrated arts school within a school at a middle school? Yes, we do, but I don't think that has been finalized. Central would obviously be the most likely one for that, but these two, if the question comes up, they're two separate issues. We could do the integrated arts without renaming, we could rename without doing integrated arts.
Okay. So Todd, you got what you think you need here? I mean,
Yeah,
there wasn't a lot there, but.
These are some of these I expected, and some, I've got some new ones to research, so.
Okay, and so you'll be taking these back to the committees. When do you think you'll be back here? Is it May or June?
In
or
the May FNF.
May? Okay. And at that time, we would have the committee's recommendations.
Correct.
And then, and Sue, we appreciate you, first of all, bringing this forth. It's been a process. Thank you for being here tonight to present and to answer any questions that we might have had too. And we look forward to seeing what the next step might be here next month. Thank you very much. All right, that is our final item tonight, and we do not have a second closed session, so we are adjourned. Thanks for your patience and being here tonight.